In this episode of the Construction Dorks, we sit down with Kelly Lubeley to take a look at some of the similarities and differences between electrical and the other trades. And while we definitely got into the weeds on the differences, we also talked about how at the process level we may have more in common than you might think. It was a great episode, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the discussion.
And we're live, episode 83, a shocking dose of reality. That's right, pun intended. Kelly Lubeley joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here, Kelly. It's awesome.
I always love chatting with you guys. It's always a good time. Always a blast.
And you never know where it's gonna go and who we're gonna offend. But the two things I can count on is it's gonna go somewhere I didn't know, and we will offend someone. So
absolutely, and that's the best way to be, right?
Right. Well, if I'm not offending anybody, I'm not saying anything worth it. So if you're the one offended, then well, I appreciate you for listening. And yeah, so that's where we're at. I am drinking today, but I am staying salty with the new element, as we should. First edition can. So this, if you've known the element, which I think both Travis and I and maybe Trent and John have all talked about the powder, but this is basically a bubbly version of it. So you can be refreshed and resaltified. So I can go riding later. Although these two tried to convince me to have a cocktail and go biking, which we know is not a good idea. So,
but it's a fun idea. It doesn't have to be a good idea.
I mean, come on. It's not a
true.
Never hurt anybody. Come on, it's fine.
Okay. What can possibly go wrong?
That is not true, Jonathan. It has hurt people. I know it has. And Kelly, we could go through that, but the show would be over. So, with that, Jonathan, I know you have been loving on the data today. So, would you?
Yes, I've been doing data tables.
Data
tables deserve Macallan's 12.
Yes.
It was that many data tables with that much interesting data behind them. So I'm going to have Macallan's 12, kill off my one from Christmas, but I'm only having one. And I was telling them I'm going to go and try to lift weights afterwards. So we'll see if I get through that.
Well, and I am rocking the water because I do not need any assistance in being more salty or more intoxicated.
Right on.
Well, that is good. So for those that don't remember Kelly, because she was on our first ever takeover show. So you can go back and find that one and give it a re-listen. Tell those that didn't catch that show, Kelly, what you do, where you're at, and yeah, let's get going.
Absolutely. So I am currently with Cupertino Electric as sort of BIM program manager, and I've also started doing some construction technology management. So I focus mainly on our BIM department with standards, templates, workflows, things like that. I'm also working with other departments within the company, helping them vet out processes and procedures and turn those into work instructions and things with tools, bringing the right tools to the processes that we want to execute at both the project level and at the enterprise level.
Cool. All right. So where do we want to start this? Jonathan, you go ahead. You look like you had us.
Oh, I'm so going to start this. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. I was going to start us somewhere else, but let's just go for it.
No, I mean, one of the interesting things is we tend to have a lot of mechanicals on. We tend to have fewer electricals on. And there is a huge, there's a massive difference in the way BIM is done on the mechanical side versus the electrical side and sort of the history within Revit. And so as you've gotten out to see more mechanicals, because I realize that you are actually one of the people that's getting out there. You're at the AEC Innovation Summits, you're at some of these other things. What are some of the differences between the way that you do things on the electrical side versus the mechanicals in their view of what a good solid model is, kind of?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the differences because at first you kind of think systems were, moving water, air, electricity from one place to another, but It's really vastly different. That's almost where the commonality stops. The model from what I see is, mechanical, I think, has long been more developed and into moving from, spatial coordination into fabrication. Fabrication has always been a part of the mechanical world. And so it's been built into their process from the beginning. So I think the models in general have always been more mature and more detailed geometrically for mechanical services than electrical services. I think the biggest difference that I see comes to the modeling, but really it's around the process of the modeling and how we approach it on a project, which is, and I do get a little salty about this, I think. Mechanical, when you get a design model, you have ductwork laid out and you have your delivery, your AHUs, your generating systems, you have your terminations, and you have the entire system in between. Same thing for plumbing. Electrical, though, I think a lot of people don't realize we get handed our origins, our power generation, and we get handed our terminations, whether it's a piece of equipment or an outlet or receptacle or switch, and we get told to connect them. We get told what kind of wire to use and how much, but we have to physically create that routing from scratch to run whatever raceways we're using from point A to point B. And I find that general contractors especially don't always take that into account when planning the coordination and the modeling. The more electrical there is, the more it's like, well, why is it taking you guys so long? Electrical or mechanical said they can turn it around in a week. Why do you guys need 3 weeks? Well, mechanical doesn't have to invent everything from scratch and figure out how to make all of our stuff work together, plus make it work together with the other trades. And I think that's one of the biggest differences we don't acknowledge.
Are you seeing more of a change to reflect at least your larger conduits and duct banks and things like that in the models? Because I saw a model that was literally the architect said, this is 100% coordinated. We have 0 clashes. We expect 0 clashes. And the electrical sprinkler and everybody else stood up and said, is there electrical in there? They're like, no. And it's like, are the sprinkler in there? No. Is there insulation on the lines? No. Then you don't have, that's not coordinated.
Yeah.
But are they getting better at all?
I think like most things in industry, we have design teams and clients that are recognizing how important that is. And so those that are kind of leading the pack on, eliminating changes that come down the road in the process, they're starting to move it up front a little bit more, especially with your bigger duct banks, underground, when we're talking about like data centers, and you get into that underground and doing heat calcs, they'll start to take that into more consideration. The funny thing though is when it comes to that actual trade coordination, right? Like with the fire sprinkler and all the other things, they're like, well, yeah, and some overhead conduit. Like sometimes you're talking about 10 feet wide racks with 4 tiers of conduit to be able to feed into the different areas of the building, and that's massive. And we still find ourselves coming up with very creative ways to work with the mechanical and plumbing contractors and how to get everything fit into the space and supported from the structure.
I don't even think I was able to see a full mechanical model until I saw one from Cache Valley. And I wanted to kind of show it off, and I wanted to say, hey, you want to see how little space there actually is? Look at it, what happens when they do every single piece, because it's pretty shocking.
It is. I mean, I've worked on a couple of projects where we'll do things like verify that we have the space for the chains that hang down from the valves, right? And so they put that in the model, and they realized very quickly, oh, well, it was a great idea to put, the electrical small conduit underneath that until we realized that there's no room for the chain to hang down. And they're going, well, now what do we do? And we're like, well, do you want to flip the entire, structure of the systems, or can we double stack them and kind of go a little bit lower into the area, or what kind of do you want to do here? Because I mean, I think we all know that whole thing, like with enough time and money, we can do whatever you want, but we need to know what your priority is. That's where a lot of that challenge comes in, is they don't stop to think about how that affects their priorities versus the end results of the project, and keeping a schedule. It's one of the hardest things, is keeping that schedule when they run into those oh shit moments.
And they happen a lot. They happen a lot. I had 2 duct banks that had to come out from underneath the concrete in the mechanical room. So it was going to be an underground duct bank, and then they put it above, and we started just laughing. We were like, we have no idea what you just ran a duct bank through the center of the mechanical room. Like, how do we even recover
Yeah.
from that? Like, actually,
Yeah.
like there's a level at um so kind of riding on that in the volume that you have. And um I've noticed that and I love AI right now. I don't love it. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. I've noticed I've noticed a lot of the AI that's targeted at BIM is targeted at electrical. You do not see, like, you see BIM routes, you see augmented AI. I just saw a third one hit, and it was all about getting your spaghetti conduit and all of that into the space early. So have you seen that? What do you think? Because I saw it and I'm like, oh, that's clever. And then I was thinking, if you did that for me with piping, I'd probably not be terribly happy, because there's a lot of things that I want to do when I lay out a room.
Yeah, so I will. This might be the part where we offend somebody. I am very interested in trying out Augmenta. It shows the most promise thus far.
Yeah.
Because of the structure of the funding, I'm not allowed to touch it yet. Because another electrical company is putting contractors putting a lot of the funding into it, and they want to protect their investment, which I understand. I'm really, really interested to see it, because I think that while it can be beneficial, uh, being able to put in all of the different requirements that we put on ourselves, right? We know that we have electrical code that we have to maintain, and that's only a small portion of the things that we take into account. It's also, there is actually a large aesthetic piece that goes into what we install, because as much as clients, or we're working in an electrical room or a pump room or whatever, and it's not attractive, that doesn't mean we can make it just do whatever we want, right? We want to make it look like a clean install. Preferences about routing, that can come down to the company, to the vendors that we have available, to the foreman that's running the crew that's installing it. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to explore some basic options and kind of get us started. I don't think it'll ever, entirely replace the process, because there's always going to be scenarios that we can't quite put in as an algorithm or as a set of rules to follow.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see how it turns out. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test any of it myself lately, but it's coming soon, and I'm very excited about it.
I think you'll really dig the way that Augmenta went about solving the problem, because they have a lot of interaction for an AI. They have you making a lot of choices. But
That's
actually,
fantastic.
the reason I asked was kind of because of your first statement that the general contractors, engineers are not showing routes for your stuff. So they are doing that for us, so they're used to it. But do you think that some of some of the software that's currently aimed at us, like Augmenta and BIM routes, do you think that it's going to find a home in the engineering world, and you're now going to get stuff with I'm going to call it an attempt at routing? Because even on the plumbing and the sheet metal side,
Sure.
I mean,
Right. They're not perfect.
no, we erase them. I mean, let's be honest. We erase them and start over, like, almost all the time. And that's nothing against engineers. I was one for a long time. You guys aren't paid to do that. We are paid to do that. Like, we don't want to be sizing your stuff. But
Right. No,
yeah,
I mean, and that's the thing, right? We have design in house, so we have a group of engineers that do work for us. That's mostly when we're asked to do design assist, when we're doing an IPD type contract. And we've been working consistently between our group that does the engineering modeling and our group that does the production modeling to create content that works for both groups. And we found out very quickly that the priority for one group is not overlapping almost at all with the other group.
yeah.
And so it's fairly easy to build the content and say, okay, well, here's the parameters that you need, here's the parameters that I need, and let's make it all work. The challenge really comes in the handoff. Because at what point are we done engineering and only, producing the construction information? And the more advanced our projects get, the more we integrate the construction with the design, right, in IPD and design build and all those things. And the more fluid clients want their projects to be, especially some of our very large clients, they'll make changes to the design constantly if it benefits them for the operations and maintenance to stay with the most up-to-date technology. And trying to find that balance, we found that there's really not a good point where we can say, okay, here's the line in the sand where the engineers model up to this point using their data. The construction group jumps in and they start modeling, or start just tweaking, making their changes. It starts to become this overlap that creates a challenge, and it requires just more and more communication. And how are we going to handle this? How are they going to handle it? How do we make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes while we're trying to get both things done? And I do think that there is a place where we could ask those engineers to start using some of those AI tools to bring in some suggestions, right, for the routing. I think for us, it will be almost a disruption to our flow because we're not used to getting it at all. And so them proposing something is for us a little presumptuous. You don't know how to install. What are you doing, right?
Yeah.
And not that we can guide them, of course, but it's going to be a guess. And like I said, it comes down to the people installing it. They may say, well, yeah, sure, that routing works, but it makes way more sense to do it this way for whatever reason. So I think we will start to see it creep in. I think it's going to come down to kind of a company by company basis and the culture that they have for how well or how effective it is. And how much, especially when we're not working with our own engineers, right? It's great that we have that process internally, but when we have another engineer and they come in and say, here's this, are we just going to say, well, we don't know who you are, out the window and start over again? Are we going to use it as a basic, guideline and go forward? Or be like, hey, cool, that part of the work's done. Let's move on to the next.
I'll tell you, we view it as those are our areas where you wanted us to be in general, and we take the sizes, obviously, but it's almost like a suggestion.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing mechanical because I recognize how much work goes into the plumbing and the mechanical systems as far as oh well, we have to readjust exactly how you guys routed this because it's not going to work physically, right? And so that constant negotiation that goes on with the engineer of how can we adapt these ducts so that either we can support them better, or so that electrical also has room to support their elements, things like that. There's plenty of work that goes into that too, and I'm hoping that might be something that AI can help solve. Is even if it can't always give us routing, maybe we can get it to the level where we do some of that initial space programming, right? Yeah. Similar to the way that they do building layout and they do room programming, that we can say, okay, the best possible configuration for laying out electrical ductwork, piping, fire protection is, here's your kind of mechanical zone, your electrical you want to be on this side, your fire protection you want to be over here. And then we already have that sort of hierarchy and that space planning laid out. And all we have to do is put the content in and then figure out the places where it doesn't quite work out.
Yeah. So that's how Augmenta kind of works, just so you know. And just a little bit.
Like I said, I'm so excited to try it out, but I totally get why it's set up the way that it is. But
just get another hat that says something else, and just you're good. No one checks.
No one will look. No one listens to the show anyway. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
It's just Kelly drafting over here wants to take a look at it.
Yes. Well, this is crazy because again, you guys went way beyond where I'm at. But while you're doing this, I remember something way back when at MSurf where there was an idea of heat mapping that I think sounds like kind of the explanation back then was we're always trying to put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag, and we're always fighting over it and forgetting about the other one or removing one and putting the other in. It'll be interesting when the tools can see each other and not take it away, because you guys seem like, and I this just amazes me that still we're at this point and we've been doing this for this long that like we haven't figured that out, where it's like engineer it to here, hand it to here, build it to there, go. I don't
and that's the thing is there's I've been having a lot of talks lately at a higher process level within our company lately. And one of the things that we have found is that every conversation starts with a direction based on how we're approaching the different perspectives at the table. And I think this is a fundamental challenge to the industry in general is, for us, it's okay, if we're talking about, safety versus quality versus production versus project management, well, there's a lot of things that we all do very differently in those groups.
Yeah.
Right. Or even same building construction, right? A data center versus a hospital versus a school, right? Well, there's things that are very, very unique to those. And I think in the type of industry that we have, we tend to focus on that uniqueness because we have a very hero-based culture in our industry, right? We have a stand out, be proud, get the thing done, and show how amazing you are. And so we focus on uniqueness. And that's helpful in being able to stand out and being successful in those individual ventures where you need to be a hero. What we don't do, and I think where the shift can happen to help facilitate, like you said, these things we keep visiting over and over again, is to look at what we have in common first. To sit down and say, okay, well, I might be building a data center and you might be building a solar field. Those are very, very different, right? Entirely different types of construction, very different requirements, very different, authorities involved. We're still working with power. We're still working with conduits. We're still working with an origin, a generation and a termination. What can we look at that's the same first and build as much sameness as we can? And once we have that really strong foundation of that consistency, that sameness, then look at, okay, well, when I do a data center, I have this that's very different than how I do a solar field. And so just that part is going to be different. And I'm going to make unique solutions for each of those. But I still have that really strong foundation of, accounts payable, accounts receivable. There is logistics. There is, there's always a single line diagram. There's always going to be conduit installed. There's always going to be trenching. Like all those different things can be combined and say, let's do all of these together. Let's do these all consistent so that as we do this, we all understand it no matter what project we're on. And then when we have the place where we do start to separate, where we get unique, have the solution for just those things that are unique. And I think that's where we all fall apart, whether it's internally within a company, whether it's a team on a project, whether it's the trades working together or the industry as a whole. I mean, if you look at a lot of the technologies that we have, most people have a preference for which one they use of those that are available on the market for any solution. And it tends to be because your perspective aligns with the perspective of the approach taken by the vendor when they developed it. But does it have to be about the approach because this company developed it from the approach of a general contractor, or this company approached it from financials, or this company approached it from being a trade contractor? Why couldn't we approach it from everybody uses AR and AP. Everybody has scheduling. Everybody has workforce planning that they have to do. Everybody has document control that needs to be done. Everybody has issues. And go from there and start with a foundation that brings everything together. And then take the time to go look at what's unique and make sure that we have solutions for those.
I like that. I like that approach, Kelly, because it's we do have a hero mentality. We do think everything's a snowflake. However, like that's like saying all three of us are different people, but if something happens to one of us and we have to go to the ER, they're not looking at our uniqueness. They're looking at our sameness and maybe the little uniqueness of who's taller, shorter, whatever. But pretty much the internal workings are the internal workings. A heart's a heart, like lungs are lungs. One's deflated. It ain't working.
Yep.
We got to fix it. And that's, from creation on, that's where we're at. It's like, it's not like, oh, look, these babies were born with feet on their head because we thought it'd be a good idea. Like, we don't do that. This is not how this works.
It's not how it works.
No. We have different gene expressions. So you do this better, or you do that better, or differently, or whatever. But yeah, we have to kind of start looking. I like that approach. Look at the sameness And somebody said this to me the other day. Well, we really have to look at construction projects as snowflakes because they are all snowflakes. And I was like, nope, you've been listening to customers too much. I did hear somebody on LinkedIn the other day, and I wish it was like one of those. I kind of wasn't paying attention; it was off on the side, and I heard him say, "We're passionate fanatics about our customers, but we don't always listen to them." Like meaning they're not always right. Not we don't.
That is true. The customer is not always right.
We listen to them, but we know they're not always right. But we're fanatical about them and we love them. And I'm like, oh, that's such a good way to put it. Because
I mean, we have very strong relationships with our obviously our most common clients, those that we do a lot of projects with. But that doesn't mean that we do whatever they ask us to. And I like to believe that's why different companies build these relationships. Is for us, most of our strong clients, we come back to them and say, we don't think this is a good idea. We think that you'll actually have better results by doing it this way. And I mean, the conversation itself is not always smooth. It never is when you're talking about, changing things or doing things in a different way. But I think there's enough respect on both sides to say, I can listen to what you're saying and see how it adjusts. Do we still get frustrated with our clients? Absolutely. Do we still, have challenges and things that our risk department gets involved or our legal department? Absolutely, yes. But it doesn't mean that we don't have a relationship with them because we have a level of understanding of their vision, their goals, and kind of where they're going. And, a good understanding of our values and how we can align with them to help them get to their vision. I think that's why we have the strong clients that we work with so frequently, is because we align, our vision aligns well with their vision, and our way of executing aligns well with their goals and their priorities in their construction programs.
Yeah, they really, I'm sure over time you've proven you've done right by them. So that's kind of, and they come out of that meeting and they're not happy for a few minutes or maybe even a few weeks, but then all of a sudden you hit that point where it's like, oh, that's why they told us that. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a day later, it might be 10 projects and 10 years later, but we get there at some point. Well, and I think it also goes back to that same thing, though, is when we come together on those things, it's because we recognize the sameness, that we are working towards a common goal. We're working to build your building. We're not working to make Cupertino money. Yes, money is important to us. We're a business. Businesses thrive on money. But the goal is to build the building for the client. And if we don't give them the best possible building, then we're not doing our jobs well. So if that means the best possible building that we can give them means, talking them into doing it in a slightly different way, then that is worth it, because it's aligning those goals together and taking that journey together that's about sameness.
I like that, because that goes back to this. I used to hear this all the time, that we are a relationship business. And I would say I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying you're mistaking a relationship as a handshake or a head nod or figure it out in the field. That's not a relationship. That's recipe for disaster. A relationship is, I'm going to sit across from you and have these conversations, but I'm still going to use these tools to digitally enhance what we're doing, probably to better communicate what I want to build or why I want to build it. I mean, I don't know in the chain one example you had earlier, but if you could just show that to somebody, it's like, oh yeah, can't do that, can you? Like that thing can't sit on the tray up there so that they're reaching over and never going to find it. Like that's not.
Yeah. I mean, and it makes all the difference in the world to be able to have that conversation, especially, I mean, I think this is one of the places where BIM still becomes so vital is, for most of us, it's a part of our everyday work to author and clash detect in BIM. Not a problem. It's the standard now. Mm-hmm. What we need to continue to look at, just like we look at, AI for helping enhance our own processes, is finding those ways which, we started originally with VR, and then we got the AR and the MR and all those things. And I think there's some great tools out there. Those really help solidify things for the clients when they need to see something like that and showing them a drawing or showing them just orbiting around the model isn't quite cutting it for them. So, you can take some of these other tools and bring them in to say, hey, if you were standing here and you know that you're going to change out the wires that are in that tray once a year, and the duct work isn't really going to get touched unless it needs service, you know, which one is easier for you to access the way that it's laid out right now? Mm-hmm. And when they have on a headset or whatever, they look up at it and they're like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying. As opposed to showing it on a drawing, you're like, no, but this one's higher and this one's lower, it really does help solidify them. So I think there's a lot of those technologies do help continue with that. And I believe that all of the different types of mixed and virtual reality are still kind of trying to find their way. We haven't found perfect use cases for everything yet, but I think we found places where it facilitates, smaller things that can have a large impact. They're maybe not the wow factor that we had hoped that they would be. But honestly, solving usability problems, solving an operations and maintenance problem at the construction stage is way more impactful than something that looks cool. Right? That's delivering what the client wants, not I showed them a rendering and their building's going to look pretty. Right?
Yeah,
or they got to walk
because that rendering has nothing that you need in it. Travis proved that years and years and years ago with the HoloLens. And somebody's trying to do something in a mechanical room and just fighting, and he just said, "Put this on." And he put it on, looked in the room, went, "Oh yeah, can't do that."
Right.
And that's worth, it's worth the entire cost of the money, entire cost of the device, etc., because it gets a decision made at the right time and stops us going back and forth or being forced into doing something really dumb, which you were at AEC Summit, you saw Charlie's pictures, like, really?
Yeah.
Who thought this was a good idea? Like, maybe we could have looked at this in some sort of virtual reality or something, but then again, like AI, in my opinion, there's no one thing yet. We're still so infantile in the way we're growing through the growing pains of, like you said, you have engineers in house and are still, because you're open book, can look and go, oh, well, none of this works for you and none of this works for them. Oh, well, all right. But how do we, go through that? And then you go, well, how about we do this when you're, in fact, those mechanical engineers and electrical engineers are actually third-party consultants as well. That doesn't complicate things, not at all.
No, never.
And they want to get paid, right? By the way, interesting thing, but that's how a lot of people get paid, and etc. So I mean, so it's a lot of the reasons too designers get in trouble for what they're doing. A lot of times they're not incentivized to, right? Like it's so there's a lot of shift. Jonathan, I'm taking over. I didn't even think I'd do that on you.
That's all right, because I was talking too much anyways. But I did have a question on the similarities, because I got a really awesome opportunity. I got the opportunity to do the big process map for VDC for the MCA. Then I got to do the project lifecycle for NECA. And now I'm doing the MSCA, the service contractors project lifecycle. So how far do it's like taking all these groups and looking as far back as you can or as high as you can to try to find all those similarities, and to really drive home the fact that no, there's so much similar that it actually is worth concentrating on. And that, yes, the special little, I think you described it perfectly, Kelly. Just perfectly. I have to ask you though, as you're looking at that, as you're looking at the similarities between jobs and everything else, what do you think represents the biggest true difference when you're moving from job to job? Because I've had a lot of discussions with people, like I've watched people tear up the process map for planning and be like, this doesn't work at all. And then 2 minutes later, they're like, no, it's fine.
It's fine.
Like, we can't come up with anything better. This is as good as we're coming up with too. So, but where do you think the areas that are really actually different are?
It's kind of in places you wouldn't necessarily think, because conduit is conduit, power, electricity is electricity. a lot of it comes down to resources, materials that are available, and human resources that are available, which is where we see a lot of differences. Something that we use, in California, we do obviously tons of work in California, and is readily available throughout the entire state, and we use it on a regular basis. We go build a data center in the Midwest, and we look for that part, and it costs 3 times as much as another way that we could use that particular material, because that's just not how the market has evolved in that area, right? Because regionally things will evolve in different ways, and so that's actually the biggest wrench that we have, I think, that gets thrown into our plans of sameness, is really around materials and resources, which honestly was not what I thought it would be. As we go through this, we're doing a big effort right now to really strongly document all of our processes. Like you said, as you go through and work with these different groups, if you get a good process outline, you'll suddenly start to find all of the overlaps and all of the gaps too, right? And so it will define where your sameness is. It will define where there may be sameness, but we haven't realized that was there before. It may also tell us where our uniqueness is. And then as we get to procedure and as we start looking at tools, we can start getting the actual stakeholders involved at the table, as opposed to the ones that, oh, well, yeah, so we're going to use a document management tool. So that's project management and production. Okay, well, what about BIM? And what about the quality guys that are going to look at your systems? And what about pre-construction? It's probably going to start populating some of that for you. So I find that really helps a lot, but surprisingly, it's really around those things that end up being regional, the resources of the materials and the people too, right? We are a union shop, and I think regardless of whether it's union or non-union, you find that the skills that are available where you're at will vary based on the type of projects that have been historically built and how that particular industry has evolved in that region. So that's, I think, where we run into our biggest challenges, is how do we compensate for that? Because, our onboarding is going to be the same. Our workforce planning is going to be the same. But then when I realized that I suddenly have a very, very high turnover rate because people aren't used to this type of work and they're not pleased with it, or there's so many competitive projects in the area that they're just cutting loose and going back to the hall to go to a different project. How do we handle that? Right. And so those are where I find we have the biggest challenge, especially when we step into a market we haven't always been in. And we don't know sometimes how much of that particular service group or that particular market might already be in that area. So like a data center. A data center to me is always a good example, because we tend to build data centers. The large data center builders tend to be in very remote places, because the land is cheap, because it spreads things out for them, because they get good, deals as far as tax breaks and things like that. And that's fine. And that makes sense. But data centers are very electrical heavy and very electrically precise buildings in ways that you just don't see in any other type of work. And so having the people that can come in and install to that level can be a big challenge, especially in rural areas where they're used to doing more traditional house wire, not home, but branch panel type wiring, lights and service type things, as opposed to, this massive power infrastructure to support, miles and miles of servers.
I got to say, I love the data centers for the electricals, because that's why you're fabbing. Like when I go and look at some of the bigger electricals and what they're fabbing, it's like you're fabbing normal stuff and then you're fabbing data center stuff, because no one can build that on site in a cost sensitive way. You really do need to be able to ship fairly significant modules. And I think you hit on it with the local talent sort of being not used to putting in a data center, because why in the world would they do that? But your company's put in 8 of them or something, you know what I mean? So you're used to building the modules. You're used to, saying, we need you to connect the modules. We don't need you to build from ground up. The thing that actually stuck out on the electrical side when I looked at all the process maps, like what you did differently, dramatically differently, because again, I got to see everybody's sort of
Yeah.
upper level process was your supply chain. Your level of wanting to manage your supply chain versus our level, way different
Yeah.
animal. And I
Yes.
think part of it's switchgear and part of it's panels. You have lead times that are absurd, like stupid
Especially
absurd.
now. Yes.
Yes, yeah. I mean, even now,
Yeah.
like COVID was bad for everybody, but you guys were, but like, um, when you look at our map, it's a blip. When you look at your map, it's in three places. And one of them's the first time you order, one of them's the first time you call. You like, take the guy out to eat too, just in case you might be able to get the switch gear like 1 week earlier. You know,
Yes.
it so do you see some challenges that you feel like are only electrical? I'm sorry, all you mechanicals, you're neat and we love you and you provide water. And we need water. But like you don't have to deal with fill in the blank problem that we have to deal with on a constant basis.
I would say honestly, the commissioning process. Like I know there is commissioning
Uh,
around some of the larger mechanical equipment,
there is.
but the commissioning for electrical is far more involved and
Yeah.
carries through every stage, and it starts to affect things like on a project. I'm not even gonna lie, I don't even know who pays for it, but when we start doing things like getting into more prefab and getting into modular construction, we have a modular division. It's in Wisconsin, but we have data centers going in 12 or 14 different states right now. When we have to ship that out, well, that equipment's getting attached to the module and the module is getting shipped to the job site. So I can't perform all the stages of commissioning at the job site now. I have to back up. And now we're talking about taking, an inspector for electrical work or a commissioning agent for electrical work that's in New Mexico and flying them out to Wisconsin so that they can start the commissioning process back when the module is being built or being assembled. Sometimes we
Yeah.
even have some products where they have to go to the vendor first while it's being built at the vendor, then go to our modular division where it's being assembled as part of the overall module or skid, and then be back at the job site for the final stage of commissioning. So I do think we're a lot more involved there than mechanical gets, and I think it's to an extreme for us to do the 5 stages of or 5 levels of commissioning is something I think only really we experience.
I did not know there were 5 levels of commissioning. So you probably like we have commissioning on stuff. We do, but no,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not to that extent. Actually, when you talked about models and trying to move forward the Revit from the engineer as a design factor, like getting design information out of that, we really have it just as spatial information. And a lot of the actual design of flows, airflow, everything else is something that we end up recreating ourselves after the model handoff because there's not enough value to what they have digitally in the model for us to really carry on. Are you carrying on all that? Like is that
No, we recreate from scratch too now
okay?
for the most part. The only time that we get to carry on is when we're using our internal engineers,
Okay.
and it's growing, but it's still a very small percentage of our business. So most of the time, yeah, it's the very kind of typical design to construction handoff where we get the model, we load it in, and it's basically just we're tracing over the top of it, or using it as a guide for okay, I'm going to place this here, but I already know the dimensions aren't right, the location's going to change because of the structure that's underneath or whatever, and so it gives us a good starting point as a reference to then say, okay, now that we're going to put all this conduit in and we can't stub up here, we can't run this direction, how are we going to move this around? Oh, we're going to do a substitute on the submittal. So now again, the equipment or the conduit windows have moved and the shape of the equipment has changed. Let's get all that in there. So we are definitely still doing all of that from scratch. That's a part that I would love to see get eliminated from the process. Like it's such a massive waste, right? To just lose all that data and have to manually go grab the parts that we want and pull it forward essentially. But it's really hard to find a way to pass that data forward. I mean, that's where I think, the technology comes into play is the industry needs to find a way to, instead of abandoning it and figuring out a way to make our process better once we get it, how can we streamline that process to carry the data through? or to pass the data through, right? We
Yeah.
can use plenty of data connectors to pull the data out of one, put it into another. But we tend not to focus on that because that's not inside our box, right? We're going to focus on once we pick it up, what can we do here, 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 here. But I think that'll be a revolution for the industry when we can start getting that data passed from the design into the construction, so it's carried on and not re-entered, thrown away completely, and start over, etc.
What's your opinion on who gets value out of that? Because I think that's what I've had a tough time selling is like the engineer doesn't want the liability. Um, as we start to add like you have to deal with your pulls and everything else. We have to deal with sort of friction loss a lot. And we'll start to add the reality of the elbows, fittings, and additional labor that is required to actually build this.
Yep.
And their calculations, we'll keep track so that we don't really, we have to make good systems. But what they calculated for the pump downstairs is not what that pump's going to do.
Right.
So who do you think really gets the value out of that? Because I seems to me, talking to engineers, even a little like they're afraid that they almost prefer us just take on all the risk, like erase it and just take all the risk that you want. Because we're good at shifting risk to you to begin with. And that, while I love the idea, and I think we've even talked about ways to do that, I think that there's not the incentive for them to do that. I feel like they kind of want to get away with it.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Is there? I don't think there's anything in the current framework or used, viable contract structures of the industry that do create an incentive to do that. And that will always be the challenge, right? Change is motivated by incentive, whether it's the carrot or the stick. It's, there has to be an incentive of some kind. And to me, I'm hoping that what we do is, however the incentive is that we get there, that to me this is the same as any of the other processes, is we have to find an incentive that gets the parties involved to focus on the sameness, right? They have things that we need, we have things that they need, and yes, I have things that they don't need, they have things that I don't need, and that's fine. But wouldn't it be better to be able to share all the things that we do have, that we utilize in common, and work together so we make it easier for both of us? Because to me, that should be the general incentive, is if I'm helping that person, it's naturally most likely going to make my life easier too. I'm not just shelling out a bunch of work to them. We're trying to get something done together, because I can't go make any changes I want and install them. My drawings still have to go back into the engineer of record, and they have to sign off on them and say, yes, this meets the requirements that we have. It follows the spec, it meets the design intent. And, so a relationship has to be built. I feel like we're just not taking it to that next stage of, instead we're making it work to get it done instead of actually helping each other out. I think that's that next step, is finding a way to incentivize helping each other out, because the altruism and the less than benefit that I receive, I'm going to put in more work than the benefit I'm going to get back without some sort of monetary, some sort of value incentive in there for me. So I hope that we find that soon, because I do think that that'll make a huge difference, because right now there is no incentive.
I'm John. I don't know that you have even a thought on how to solve it. The only thing I can think of, honestly, one is you're starting to bring them in house, right? And I think one of the ways is to disrupt the business model completely. I mean, that is one of the biggest problems, is the business model itself, that those entities are separate, and one stamping the other's work and doesn't want to take on the risk, right? But in the end, like, the engineer of record has to stamp your submittals and your detail, right? And so they are ending up taking the risk. So why are we wasting some of the time? I wish I had Sal here, because that argument happened live at an event with him.
Yes.
And I. Yo, it was him and I. Jacob Dalbora and Ryan from Join, who's now with STO, and we were on a panel, and this engineer got up and is like, well, I'm the engineer of record, I'm going to stamp it, I'm not doing that. And then Sal was like, wait a minute, in the end, don't I detail it and then you sign off on that anyway? And he just quietly sat down. And I was like, that's why I bring Sal places.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Is this? I mean, I think electrical really highlights that is you can't build off of what the engineer gives you because
No.
all the conduit's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you literally do not have the connections between point A and point B. Right? And so, okay, well, I can't build it. It cannot be built. They call it issued for construction, which is a terrible term, right? You cannot build off of IFCs from a design group. I know that there are some that say that you can. I'm
No.
sorry. We're just not there yet.
No.
I don't know if we ever will be. But when they issue their IFC, I mean, that's more like issued to construction so that the construction group can take it and figure out the rest to actually get to for construction. Because even in-house, we call them IFCs.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're issued for construction. This is buildable now.
Now it is. Yeah. It'd be interesting there to look at if there's a capability for a tool to take what's been passed to you that you've then worked on, that then, because the risk, if I'm not this is me dumbing it down, right? Because I don't actually do it, but the risk is that you've done something that they have to sift through to find the thing you did that's wrong, right? Quite frankly, wrong happens, right? It's not like you did it on purpose to be wrong.
Yeah.
But wrong happens, right? That's why engineers exist, right? We need things to stay standing, or hold the load and power and all that. Be cool to see, like I remember just the easy thing of like Bluebeam slipstreaming and seeing the call outs around things that were different.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if there was like an engine, so they hand it to you, you do your thing, you hand it back, and everybody can see what's been done, called out. It's like, there's nothing up my sleeve here.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
have you
ahead.
ever been asked to, I was going to ask you, have you ever been asked to do that? Asked to do the maintain the engineer's model as reference during construction? Somebody gave me a NWD file, like a lightweight file to put on top. And they wanted to see in every coordination meeting where the engineer had it and where we had it. And it was an owner. And when you were talking about value, the only person that has value in all that, in my mind, is the owner. Like if I am an educated owner, which don't exist a lot, I know you should get along. Like that's I know that saves me money ultimately, and I don't care if it costs you money. So, but
Right.
have you ever had to do that? Have you ever had to try the dual? I don't even know what to call it. It was like shaming the engineers. What I felt it was at the end of the year. Or at the end of the day.
It's I haven't done it personally. I can't say that we've never had a project ask our project team to do that at that level. But it is pretty rare because I think most owners at least have the understanding that it's going to change. And so, hey, engineer, are you good with the change? Yes, we're good with the change. And so that's considered enough. It is an interesting idea to look at how far we started with the design and then, how much changed from beginning to end. Some things, we have the occasional panel that really doesn't move at all. Like it's a little bit bigger than what the engineer modeled, but otherwise it's same location, same stub ups, same routing, etc. But that's not super common. You get that with maybe like house and lighting panels, right? Not your massive switch gear or your switchboards or your transformers or anything like that. Those all tend to have to move around a bit. I think the other thing too is looking at those changes that get made. I mean, when it comes to power, it doesn't really matter physically where the different points of connection are located, right? We have our code that we follow, no more than 360 degrees of bend, etc. But it's no better or worse to have two pieces of equipment right next to each other versus in the next room or across the building. And so I think the value for that type of comparison would be around, did I have to change the flow of power? Did I have to upsize or downsize anything based on what I started with from the engineer to where we got to the final construction? And is it about the design versus the execution, right? Because we will upsize conduit very frequently as a cost savings, because we'll be told, oh, you have to use 2.5-inch conduit. Okay, cool. But guess what? We're already using 3-inch conduit over here. So if we just buy all 3-inch conduit, we know we're going to be good with our fill rates and things like that. So why not do that? But did we have to add a conduit, or did we have to upsize because there's more wires that are really needed and we went over our fill rates and now we had to add a conduit? Or we had to change out the type of wire that we're using, things like that. And I think that would be helpful, but I don't know that it would be helpful to do that kind of, like you said, to me, it sounds like engineer shaming.
It did, and I think it grew out of, I don't know if you were at MEP Innovation this year, but, they did do a talk on some of the new, guidelines that are coming out for change orders. And
Okay.
because they do draw all of our routing, there is a level at which during coordination you've crossed the line, and now we can hit you for additional costs. And they're making this more and more, concrete. So the one that was introduced at MEP, I don't want to get into because I can't remember it exactly, so I'll misquote it. Um,
That's fair.
which is horrible, but it wasn't significant. It was basically everybody in the room would have thought that 60% of their jobs required, um, would have violated this rule. So
That's a
it,
lot.
it was, yeah, I mean, we eat a lot of costs. We do that. Our estimators know that though. Like I'm sure yours do too. Our estimators for every turn take off 2 elbows. For
Yeah.
every this, you're adding labor because there will be changes. Do you think with the level of they don't show any of your stuff. Do you get a lot of change orders for sort of routing and design changes, or is that something that just doesn't happen because they didn't show it to begin with?
Oh, it definitely happens. Especially with these large projects like the data centers, those places where they do show that little bit of routing in these more congested and larger banked places. Frequently, the routing that they show, because they do just what we call a one-line drawing, they're not showing the thickness of the conduit, and they're not taking into account the spacing for the heat calcs and things like that. And then they don't know what the structural footing sizes are going to be. And so we get a lot of RFIs that eventually become change orders around that. I think our change orders stay fairly minimal, because most of the routing isn't shown. But we put in a lot of RFIs because it's not shown. There's usually some things in the specs, but there always comes up questions about things like, oh, well, can we use some sort of access point if we need to go over the 360? Because, not only did you put this across the building, you also put it up 3 floors, and there's a significant structure in the way. So, can we have a pull box, or, what can we use? Can we use conduits? Can we use, full size pull boxes? What type of access do you require? Those types of things, they tend to come out early, but there's typically a lot of RFIs because there is no routing information. So we have a lot. I feel like we have a lot more RFIs, but not as many change orders.
That's a data treasure right there. Like,
Yeah.
the number of RFIs around those problems and around what's been created, that's all time and money. Time is money, right? So
it is. And it's
there-
funny. I think I would love to see a really concrete analysis of the time that's done in this technology stage, right? In the BIM stage where we're talking about modeling and coordinating and things like that are what a lot of us consider just part of doing the job. Oh, change the direction of this. Oh, go a different way. Oh, what if we do it this way, right? That doesn't result in a change order. It doesn't even typically result in an RFI, but it's a level of work that doesn't always necessarily need to be done at that level of modeling.
Mhm.
And so we're generating more and more cost in that modeling kind of category that may not be necessary. I mean, we track things that we call internal changes and external changes. External changes always result in change orders, or should. Internal changes can be things anywhere from, BIM made a mistake, and so we need to go back and correct the mistake. It could be we made it all the way through the the coordination process, issued the drawings, and a foreman decided that they don't want to route the conduit that way, so they came back and gave us markups prior to installing it. Or we decided we're going to go with a different product. Okay, let's go back and rework that, right? Those kinds that we track things like that, but there's so much more that I know we eat the cost on just for the sake of, teamwork. I think in the coordination process, that would be interesting to see how much of that is done because we're trying to figure things out, or we're trying to get our way, or we're trying to, solve a problem that the engineers didn't solve.
Mm.
That's the rub, though, is the motivation for those changes is always really tough to do. We actually, I was wondering, do you track
I feel like I'm gonna
overshooting?
interrupt you. I'm
Go
interrupting
Go
you.
ahead.
ahead.
I feel like Kelly should put the cat here and
Oh yeah, no, please, please, evil genius the cat.
Evil Genius the cat. It's a white
Mr. Bigglesworth.
Mr. Bigglesworth.
She is. I just got home yesterday from a trip, so she's a little
Aw.
anxious for my attention.
Yeah, I saw that. Like, hey,
Yeah. Excuse me.
excuse me, I'm here.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. I totally did that to you, but I wanted the Mr. Bigglesworth moment.
No worries. No, I was just gonna ask you, like, do you track, because everybody does seem to track their mistakes. Not a lot of people track where they were overly successful. Do you have good measures for that? Because I am struggling to find out, like, I'm like, I heard that the first time, like, great idea. How do you measure that exactly? And no one could tell me. And I don't have like, victims to impose my will upon anymore. So
Yeah. Tracking is so hard in the BIM world in general, right? Because the work is so much more nebulous or abstract
yeah.
than all of the other work that happens in the construction process. I will say we actually have a homegrown tool that was developed for us that takes data from our document management platform, where we do drawing reviews, internal drawing reviews, and we take the activity of that. This drawing was uploaded on this day. It went in for review on this day. It came back as returned or rejected on this day. And we compare that to the schedule for each install drawing, which is, okay, it needs to be out in the field by this day, which means it needs to be approved by this day. And right, we back out our expected dates then and marry up those expected dates to the actual dates for when we went through and did our QA/QC to get it out to the field. And we do highlight overly successful drawings, is the best way I can put it. We expect drawings to go through, our goal is 3 cycles of QA/QC or less internally before it gets submitted. It should be 2, right? It goes in once, they put markups on it, we fix all of it, and they say approved. We do up that to 3 because sometimes you missed something, sometimes they missed something, right? We get it worked out. So it tracks that, and it'll tell us, like, and we get drawings. Some drawings go in one time and they're approved. Fantastic. That is a rarity. I mean, I think anybody would readily admit that none of us are perfect, and a drawing going in and getting 0 markups and saying, yep, send it out to the GC is very rare. But if we have them, we actually have a dashboard that shows us those. And we'll say, yes, we had this many drawings that only had 1 review, or this many drawings that only had 2 review, because we also get the other data where we have a drawing that went through 10 reviews. And then, because that's usually at that point, the reason that you notice when we don't have a dashboard is we didn't get this drawing on time. What's going on? Mm-hmm. And then it's, okay, cool. We can go back and see, okay, well, it went through quality control 10 times. Okay. Why did it go through quality control 10 times? So that's our best. And it's a helpful tool. It's a very small metric in all the things that can go right to track. Because it's one of the few things that's concrete for us, right? How do I say, oh my God, this person did a great job running these conduits and not having them clash with each other or with the underground plumbing? It got done on time. It got done ahead of time. It's hard to find a benchmark, and it's always an interesting conversation. I'm sure you run into this on the mechanical side too, where when you're talking to leadership, especially that has come from the field, so they have a very deep understanding of the install process. They understand, labor rates and workforce planning and all those things. And they're starting to get involved with BIM, and they go, okay, great. So how many feet of conduit can you model in a day? What? Well, do you want to know how many I ended up with? Do you know how many? Do you want to know all of that I drew and then deleted? Like, are we doing like, are we adding them up? Are we subtracting out the ones that I deleted? What about when I rerouted it and changed it? Like, how do you quantify that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and was
Right?
it down a corridor or through a mechanical room? Did you have like a weird I had somebody that was tracking keystrokes on somebody, and I was like, "Dude, they have to sit there and think about it. That's actual work, is them thinking about it, and if they can do it in their head versus typing it all in, they're better than the guy that's typing everything in at once."
Yeah, I mean, probably about 10 years ago, I remember being at
Hmm.
back then it was called RTC, right? I think it's called Built now. But
Yeah.
there's the Revit Technology Conference, and a gentleman from a vendor did a really great presentation on how he was collecting journals and creating dashboards by scraping the data from the journals, so he could see, all of the individual clicks, how long you were idle, what model you had open, things like that. And I remember thinking, that is really cool that he figured out a way to process that data. Why would I care if somebody opened a model that they're not supposed to be in? Because chances are, if they opened it and it's not the model they're working on, it's because they're looking for a reference. They're looking for.
Copy paste.
I'm not going to scold them for that.
Yeah, there's no, yeah, like,
Yeah. So
oh,
it's like,
you wanted to see it done right? Sorry.
yeah,
No,
like
you can't do that.
conceptually, that's great. But I mean, and the other thing too is, you know, modeling in Revit is like, sketching, right? With pencil and paper. There's a million different ways to get from point A to point B, right? Whether you're using the copy tool or the move tool or the offset tool or, whatever. How can you compare one person's way of getting from point A to point B to another person's when the method isn't even the same, right? It's not grab a piece of conduit, put the solvent and glue on the end, push it into the other piece, do this. It's not like that. It's so very different, and there's the tools that are there are for us to be creative and to think that the way that we think. No two people think the same. I can show people how I find it helpful to, model a rolling offset. But that doesn't mean that that's what makes sense for them. As long as they model it and they make their deliverable, what difference does it make how they got there? Which is what we operate on in the BIM world. But when we start talking about productivity, and especially, productivity tracking is such a huge thing right now because of all the changes that have come along in the industry. How do I say somebody is more or less productive if somebody used copy when somebody else used offset? So it's such a hard thing to try and do. And I don't think we'll ever get something that's satisfactory for people that are used to such concrete numbers.
Yeah, and they do cringe a little bit when you can't tell them, or when
Yeah.
I love when they ask when the model's going to be done, and I kind of look at them like, sometime after you're done with the building, like
Right.
couple
Maybe
months
never.
after you're done with the building, the model might be done if we don't pass it off to facilities, right?
Yeah, maybe never. Yeah.
Maybe never. We'll see.
Yeah. So everything, I'm having this experience where when you see a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I did this thing with earlier today with a company called Water Cooler, and they're pulling the most interesting metadata out of systems to look for and scope out the way people are interacting and looking for burnout and predicting burnout. And it's not pulling what you're doing. It's pulling the metadata. Now it pulls, kind of info about you from HR systems that's, by the way, just sitting in there and never getting used. That includes your PTO, your time off. But 90% of it's just like, it's just there. You put it there once and it's never going anywhere.
Yeah.
Then like tenure and stuff. But then they're matching it up to how long you're in Slack and these other things, but not what you're doing or what you're typing, just that you are, and the metadata, and maybe in Slack who you're typing to, or in Teams who you're typing to like look for potential burnout, people who are working at too high of a pace all the time and not taking time off or whatever, to give businesses an idea. This guy Eitan that invented it burned out himself multiple times, like we've heard from a lot of our people. I'm wondering if that's where some of the ability to call out I don't care how you're doing it. Copy, paste, offset. I I want to know how many of you in a project team are working in the same area and sort of repeating the same stuff to sort of quantify like this is insanity. His tool will never do that. He immediately
Right.
very, but I'm like, hey, this technology exists. Wouldn't it be interesting to know
Well,
how?
honestly, that to me is the biggest value to come out of that could come out of the rising of AI.
Hmm.
Right? I don't care if it can solve conduit routing for me because we can all do that,
Mhm.
and we are going to always have changes. But what if we could look at the numbers that we do collect? Right? How many hours did somebody spend doing this type of work versus that type of work? How many times were they chatting and sending emails, which means they were probably getting answers to the things that they had versus actually executing in the model? And, you know, how we analyze those can start to determine things, right? We need to start to build the foundation for that, but then we can start to quickly identify, okay, if we have a project where all of the modelers are spending, you know, 3 times the amount of time as other projects on chat and email, what are they missing in the data that they need to get their project done?
I
What
saw.
is the breakdown in that project? And I think that's where we'll be able to actually to create better efficiencies within the industry and realize the value of AI is the things that we can make conjecture about, but to strongly look at that data and look at the patterns behind it and then predict from those patterns in the future of the data we collect, not try and generate new data for us.
Yeah, that's it. That's yeah. And honestly, the technology, as much as I know it, that he's explained it, it does that, right? Because
That's fantastic.
part of what it's doing is tracking, like, are you emailing, and
Right.
so those are triggers. Are you slacking? And so, wow, when we're on these projects or this group of type of project, or maybe customer or engineering firm, whatever it might be, look at the amount of extenuating traffic and the less time we're spending actually doing value add work in the model itself. That's actually what it's tracking. That's how it works. Because it's like, here's a real interesting and easy one. It's like, how often should you, as a manager, interact with your employee? You can't really answer that question, right?
It depends on the employee. It depends on the type of work you're doing and their skill set. And,
The answer is it depends.
it depends. Right.
However, if you take all of that data and all of the history and all of that comes into account, you can realize that, hey, one's not enough and three's too many. So you go for two. Or maybe it's a new employee, and so 3 to 4 is good. It's a John, I used one of your things about, autonomy and mastery. It's like, and then there's the Johns of the world where you're just like, listen, it's got to be due by here. I'm going to check in to see how you're doing it at some point because I should do that. And so that I care about you, and then done.
No, and I think that's a great,
Autonomy.
yeah, I think that's a great point, especially when it comes to, management and mentorship, is because, I think all industries have this, not just the construction industry, but how frequently do you find that you're not talking to your people because they're performing well? Right.
Mm-hmm.
People that you're talking to are the people that are struggling, or you've been told they need to be talked to about something.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not talking to the people who are keeping themselves afloat, who are managing to work through it. It doesn't mean that they're thriving. It means that they're getting the work done.
They're surviving different.
Yes.
I think this tool does a lot of that. I'm
I'd
dying.
be really interested in seeing it. Absolutely.
I'm trying to get it socialized because also, I think there was a misunderstanding to how construction is done. And when I sat down with them, I saw Nathan and I did an article on them, or read an article and covered it on the show, the crew.
Sure.
And I reached out and I just kept bugging them. I'm like, I have to talk to you guys because I had this feeling like they probably don't know how digital we really are, because we look analog to the outside world.
Yes.
But some of our most stressed and highest performers are digital performers. and our thinnest, we don't have enough. I've never been anywhere and been like, do you have enough BIM people? And they're like, plenty coming out my ears. That's, like, why? You need one? I got like 10 extra. Here you go. No, they're all like, yeah. And they're locked in a room and you can't talk to them at all.
No one is allowed to disrupt them whatsoever.
Yeah.
Ever. But then again, you're right, Kelly. Like, how many stories of the high performers, like, and nobody cares about me? And you're like, or how about this? You had them on, you have those people, right? You're fixers. You're like, uh-oh, I got to pick up the phone. This has gone to hell in a handbasket. And I got to get them in here to fix it. And they get in to fix it, and you don't realize that they just came off another fix and another fix. And they're, instead of like this, they're like,
yeah. I mean, that's right. Oh, you are our best modeler. You're the one that knows how to do this. Could you go over and fix this problem over here? Like, your reward for doing well is to tackle something that's going to be even more stressful for you.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, you're really great at managing these complex projects. Let me put another one on your plate because I know you're definitely not busy enough.
Yeah, exactly. So that is that's the, I go to Christina's story. That's her story, right? She was consistently climbing the charts on every look. It's like, high performer, kicking butt, all the things, and then poof, burnout.
Yeah.
Well, that's what interests me about water cooler is it's supposed to be able to predict that with pretty high certainty and call out the areas of your organization that are at risk, so that it doesn't tell you what to do.
Right.
It shows you that there's probably a problem, and then you can use the data to go make some changes or look into things or try and get involved. Because you can't afford to lose those high earners.
Well, no, I mean, and honestly, a lot of that burnout, it comes from, lack of mental health self-care, and support from your organization, right? Whether it's the group or the company or whoever. And a tool like that will, go a long way to help starting to realize where those gaps are, how we can facilitate, helping those that are struggling, giving them a moment to relax and take a breath. And then at some point, hopefully helping them thrive, not just survive and execute because they're functioning, at such a rapid pace, because everybody hits burnout and you don't even typically realize that you do. It's just suddenly all of a sudden somebody else notices. They're like, you are reacting differently, or you started being late to work, or that is way more coffee cups than I've ever seen on your desk before,
Well, and the funny thing is it shows in ways we don't know too, that like you and I think John, you see it this way too. It's like, I could see those in people. Oh, wow. Like, I mean, just think about traveling on the circuit. And when I see people in September, and then, I see that same group of us at the boothies in November, and I'm like, that coffee cup's really big. I can see that, and I saw you with your client at midnight last night, and I saw you at the booth at 5:30. Like, I can see that. The interesting thing about what they're doing with data too is they can pick up on the disassociation. So in the beginning, you're like answering that, everything like that. And then all of a sudden, as you burn out, some people just pull away. And they're like, I used to get back to my boss in 10 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll make you ask a few more times. I don't care. And we don't see the pullback.
I think the tool's cool. I really do. The way that you've described it. What I worry about a lot lately is we have a sort of productivity culture, and there is a cap. Like, even high performers, mega high performers, that's not good. Like, if you identify yourself as a high performer, really what you're saying is, I work too hard on a regular basis, so much so that I'm sort of like an athlete that's lifted too much. Like I'm going to eventually break down. And I think the tough thing is, every time I see a tool like that, it's used to increase performance rather than to level out performance so that you have a consistent, happy lifestyle. And I don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of the tools that say, hey, listen, we realize that productivity stops about here. I remember we were at MEP Fab, and Ryan Hoggett was over at a welding booth, and he's like, they are at peak performance. They will not weld any faster. I do not want them to weld any faster. I will change their environment to make life easier. I will give them cooler tools. I will give them more nice things to make that environment better. But they have peaked at their productivity levels. And I would say, like, some of those more mature VDC shops that have been it forever, they have people that are at peak performance. At peak performance so often that regardless of whether or not they show those things that lead up to burnout, they are going through them. They're just really good at hiding it. And those are the ones that do the Christina drop, or you know, I think all of us know what our little signs are. I leave my keys in the refrigerator personally. My keys end up in the refrigerator.
That's a very specific sign.
No, it's my wife's sign. And then I have a stutter, and I don't have a stutter until I'm right at that edge. And so I know, like, if you're stuttering, chill the hell out. But I also got to say, like my wife's pointed out several times, we are all about performance and productivity as we're managing people. And that means that we're going to make the mistakes as managers of valuing that more than we value long-term sort of, I want to say, I don't even know what to say without saying productivity, sort of long-term healthy working. Because the work-life balance is
it's
sustainability.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's, you know, we operate very similar to machines in that fashion. I have, you know, if I have a sports car, I can drive it at 210 miles an hour and yes, run the RPMs all the way up to, you know, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000. But can I drive my car across the country like that? Probably not. It's going to break down. So I don't drive my car like that all the time. I put it to its paces and have it hit 100% performance in critical times of need.
Yeah.
Right? I should be operating at a lower percentage for longevity and reliability the majority of the time. And that's what we don't see is the expectation is, oh, I saw what your 100% is. I now expect that all the time. Okay, we'll go max out every one of your pieces of equipment and tools and see if they can do that full time.
Nope.
And that's where I think a lot of that comes in is we don't process or think about performance the way that we should, because we know not to run a tool at 100% all the time. We know that will break down. Hell, an air compressor is supposed to be 50-50. It should never be running more than 50% of the time it's being used. Half. Can you imagine if we operated at 50% or the perceived 50%, right? That would be unacceptable. You'd be fired.
Yep.
But I think it's important that we recognize, yeah, can you operate at 100%? Can you get this done? Yes, I can get that done. But I shouldn't be under in an environment that requires me to do that consistently for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Did either of you read Anti-Fragile?
No.
I have not yet.
Pick up Anti-Fragile. I don't like the author. The author's kind of obnoxiously, you'll find him very obnoxious. But read Anti-Fragile, because I think a lot of what you guys were describing, it kind of fits into that idea. And that idea works for weightlifting too. Like, you lift a maximum weight and then you recover for 2 days or 3 days. Mm-hmm. If you lift the maximum weight 2 days in a row, you don't grow any muscle, you don't get any stronger. But if you rest long enough, this is actually a positive thing. Not that we could do that with people that actually do physical work, because that'd take too much calculation. But like, in theory, you could work people and cycle them, and they would actually get stronger and healthier doing a physical job. We're not going to do that, I don't think. But like, you know, it's a good dream, right?
But, you know, I think that it also too goes back to, you know, we talk about this, you know, productivity tracking and AI and all these other things. I think one of the underlying challenges is not just seeing the data, but understanding the data. I am a huge nerd. I love technology. I love data. I love all the things that I can learn from it. But putting certain data in, like, there's very easily a bad mismatch of data and perspective, right? If a person, right, somebody who sees the productivity on a project has tanked, you know, if it's a higher level manager would be like, you need to go in and fire these people. Okay, well, that is a choice because of the productivity, but you don't know why their productivity tanked. It doesn't mean they just decided that they didn't want to work and they're all standing around. It means they're burnt out. It means that there has maybe during the pandemic, right? COVID went around the group. There's been IT issues. There's a lot of things that can affect the data. The data is meant to be indicators.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that so many times we look at those indicators as the answer, right? They're not the answer. They're the symptoms that are pointing you towards the answer.
It's
towards the
so
diagnosis.
funny. Josh Bone does such a good job with this. So speaking in the electrical world, it's great.
I love Josh Bone. Who doesn't?
He right, but he does this whole thing on data, and he shows this graph about the milk consumption in the United States amongst adults, kids, and senior citizens, and it's all going down. So if you're in you're a milk farmer, right? You're in that world. You're thinking, oh crap, right? The end of the world. Then I should get out of this business. But then he flips to another piece of data that shows milk-based product consumption is at an all-time high because that includes cheese and yogurt and all the other things that are made with milk. And then you're like, sweet, I should start a farm. And then he shows the number of farms versus the number of cattle on farms and how, basically they're getting larger and larger, and that's the curve. And he's like, see, none of these alone tells the story. All of them together informs you better. So it's all in context. Outside of context, data's crap.
Yeah.
So you've got to, it has to be there, but then we have to be smart enough to put other pieces of context around it to then formulate a well-informed perspective to kind of understand, okay, here's how we can then do something with this. So
yeah.
All I know is we just went way off the rails. We are way into the show. I just looked at the time. I knew this was going to happen.
And it always does with us.
This was just with two dorks too. So
yeah.
I can't imagine if Travis and Trent were here too.
Yeah, they wanted to be here. Travis is flying because he's our new jet setter. And Trent is driving because he's our new drive setter. I don't know. I didn't have a good word for that one. They both wanted to be here. Kelly, I guess we could do this for hours. And I'm so thankful you sat down with us and we got to see you. I got to see you at AC Integration a couple of weeks ago, where we said we got to do this again. So we're doing it again. I like it.
Awesome. Well, it was great seeing you guys again. I always love chatting with you, and it's always a fun conversation. Always things to learn, and hopefully other people that get a chance to listen, find some not only value but also entertainment in it. I like to go for that too.
I hope we made a few people laugh, maybe a few people yell at us. I'm sure we made a few enemies along the way, and we didn't get too salty, but we didn't.
So we kept it pretty mild, I think.
You guys were pretty good, man.
Yeah. Well, John, man, you've had your McAllen, you did your data. Now it's time to do a little lifting. I'm gonna do a little biking. Thanks for dropping in and hanging out tonight, John.
Right on.
Well, this has been episode 83, a shocking dose of reality.